Hey everybody, so this is part two in this little tutorial on how to get a website going for your band. What we're going to be talking about today is plugins. Plugins are little pieces of code that you can add to your website, sometimes not so little, but that you can add to your site that will add functionality. Just like a plugin for Logic or Pro Tools gives you extra effects you can add, plugins for WordPress do the same thing, but just for your website. One thing that I will definitely say about plugins is that sometimes when I see some people's WordPress sites that help out with, they have tons and tons of plugins installed on their site. You don't want to do that. You want to keep the number of plugins you have on your site to a limited amount. Sometimes you might find that, oh, but I need to use this plugin this one time to do something. If you're only going to use it once, you probably don't need it in the first place, unless maybe it's something like I need to export data for something, and there happens to be a plugin for it. Then after you're done using it, get rid of it. Some plugins fade away over time and they stop being maintained, which means that they can become security risks. And even though you might not think that your band's website poses a huge security risk to you, anytime you leave any data that you own vulnerable, you're kind of running a security risk. You can read up on all kinds of horror stories. One of the great ones is a guy who had the Twitter handle @N, just the letter N is in Nancy. He actually got stolen by some guys who kind of hacked their way into one of his sites that he hosted. So in general, you want to maintain your plugins list and keep it just to the stuff that you really need. So I'm going to take you through the plugins that I use for our website. It's a pretty concise list of things. To install a plugin, we can go to the left here in WordPress to plugins and just hit add new in the menu that pops out. All of the plugins that we're going to install are available on the WordPress plugin directory, which means that you can just search for them right here. We don't have to do anything manual for these. The first plugin that we're going to install actually comes pre-installed with WordPress, which is Akismet. If it happens to not be in your installation for some reason, then this is how you'll install it. But typically this plugin comes preloaded in most installations. And so it's actually, as I'm seeing now, it's the first one in the upper left here, and it's already marked as installed. If it wasn't, we would just click this install button. The next plugin, and I'll talk about setting these up after we have them all installed. We'll just get these all installed so it's done. The next one is Jetpack. Now, Jetpack is a plugin that is supplied by WordPress itself. One of the kind of unfortunate things that WordPress is doing is they are baking a lot of new features into this Jetpack plugin instead of the kind of core WordPress repository. It's fine. I mean, it's just going to be a little annoying because some of these things that they provide, there's no need for the plugin. It doesn't have any necessity for WordPress.com to be involved, which is different than WordPress.org. But that's what they're doing. So we're going to install it because we're going to want some of these features. So we searched for the plugin. It's going to ask me if I'm sure that I want to install it. I just hit OK. We'll wait for this to load, and I apologize that this will be a little slow. Again, what we're working on right now is hosted on my laptop itself, so it's not going to be the speediest website ever. This is just running off of a little MacBook Air. One thing I could say while this is installing is that Jetpack comes with a number of different features within it, and so we're going to go through once we're done installing all the plugins, Jetpack itself, and talk about different pieces of it that we are and are not going to use. After you install a plugin, you'll always see this screen. Since we're going to be using all of these plugins, I'm just going to activate them right away. and just click Activate Plugin here. Installing a plugin does not mean that it's necessarily turned on. You can have one that is deactivated, meaning that nothing on your site can access that plugin. This would be a good use case if you did have something where you import and export every once in a while using a plugin. Something along those lines, a plugin that you only need temporarily, you could leave it installed and just activate it when you need it, and deactivate it otherwise. So that's activated. We're going to come back to the plugin installer again. You can do all this really quick. The next one we're going to install is GigPress. GigPress has been around for a long time. You can see here it says since 2007. It's pretty much the standard plugin everybody uses for maintaining their list of shows. At times, if you are kind of a fan of the way that WordPress has started doing things recently, this might seem a little bit outdated. There are other plugins in the market that do things in a more modern WordPress way, but they don't have the user base that GigPress does. So GigPress tends to be much more well-maintained. Over time, that might change, but for now, we're going to stick with GigPress as a way to manage our list of shows. It has a lot of features that are great, including RSS feeds and iCalendar feeds that people can subscribe to. We're going to activate this one. Okay. So this one, interestingly, took me back to the list. We'll come back to this list when we're done and take care of some of the straggling things. We're going to install another plugin, which I can just click Add New here. This plugin is called Stratus. This plugin is, it's originally by Lee Martin, who worked for SoundCloud for a while. I think it's now maintained by SoundCloud. What it does, it just provides that little music player that we saw in the last video at the bottom of the screen, and that's linked to a SoundCloud account. So we're just going to hit install now on this one. It's a very basic plugin. We'll talk about configuring it in a later video. If you don't use SoundCloud at all, then there's no reason to install that plugin. I do like SoundCloud though, and what they've been doing recently, making it more like a social network for music has been kind of interesting to see. Plus, they have great embedded players, definitely the best ones. And if you want to share your music to a blog site or something, the way it's going to look and function the best is usually with SoundCloud. So I tend to stick with them. The next plugin we're going to install is called SunPress. Oops, I typed that in the wrong place. I got to go to the Add New up here. That was to search what I already had installed. SunPress. SunPress is basically like MailChimp, but for your WordPress site. Now, you can feel free to use MailChimp as well and ignore this part of the tutorial when we talk about SunPress. MailChimp has a plugin for WordPress as well that you can install. MailChimp is hosted, and at some point you have to start paying for stuff. SunPress has more limited features. Like, they don't have the design features that MailChimp does, which admittedly are great, but we don't need a whole lot of fancy design for our mailing list for the band. What I care more about is that I don't have to pay for subscribers. Like, if my subscriber list, it's a couple thousand people, I don't start getting dinged for money. The only catch to this is if you do this, you'll want to watch the video where we talk about SunPress, because there are some kind of caveats to using it on a self-hosted site that have to do with how much email you can send out at a time using your server. Each host that you may have gone with will be a little different than this, and so that you don't get flagged by them and you don't get starting to be marked as spam, you're going to want to understand a little bit about that. So we're going to install this. One other nice thing about SunPress is then you own your mailing lists. While it's not a huge risk, there is always the risk that a third-party service gets robbed, hacked, or just gets shut down, and you're left dangling with lost data. Granted, that risk is still here with our WordPress site, that our hosting server could go down. One thing that we'll talk about as we go through this is backing up all of our WordPress data so that we don't ever lose it. That's something that we should do periodically. So we have SunPress installed. The last plugin I'm going to install here is called, oops, I'm doing this wrong again. If you ever have to use this search box, you probably have too many plugins installed. We're going to click Add New. We're going to go W3 Total Cache. Now, I've been seeing this a lot lately, that WP Super Cache shows up on the front page. These two plugins are pretty similar to each other. You can use either one. They both essentially do the same thing. I just have experience with W3 Total Cache, and you'll see as I pull this up, it has a ton of users as well and just as good of a rating. There's very few things that they actually do differently from each other from what I can gather. So I'm going to install this. This plugin, however, I am not going to activate right now. The reason I'm not going to activate it is because it's a caching plugin, which we'll talk more about later, but it can get in the way of us setting up our site. This is a plugin that, when we are all said and done, will help our site load faster. And I did just activate it by accident, but nice enough with WordPress, I can deactivate it really quick. So again, just make sure that you have W3 Total Cache deactivated as we go through the rest of this. Now, WordPress always comes pre-installed with this Hello Dolly plugin. We don't need it, so we're going to delete it now. You can just hit yes, delete these files when you get to this screen, and it's gone. Now, Akismet, we need to activate. When I click activate on Akismet, you're immediately going to see this at the top, activate your Akismet account. This is a third-party service. And what it does is it helps you reduce comment spam, which is rampant throughout the internet. It's just as bad as email spam. So you're going to want to activate this. Now, I'm running off of a kind of development environment here, so I don't want to activate this plugin right now because I would have to create an account linked to my local little laptop here, and that's not really worth doing. What I can say is that this is as easy as just activating it. Once you click on this link, you'll be taken to a screen. It'll give you all the instructions that you need on how to activate Akismet. This is the first thing you should do now after all of your plugins are installed, because this plugin is absolutely essential. So let's go back now, and the last thing we'll talk about in this video is Jetpack. Jetpack gets installed up here. Now, you'll notice that Akismet is under here as well. That's because Akismet is a service actually provided by WordPress. But what we want to do is we are going to go to settings here for Jetpack. And I apologize for the notifications popping up there. I should probably throw the do not disturb on. So as you can see, Jetpack has all these different features. As soon as you go to settings, it can be turned on. Now, it recognizes right away that I am in development mode. You won't see this on yours if you're on a hosting site. When you load this up, some of these will already be activated. Now, like I was talking about before, typically we don't want to have any code running that we're not using. Aside from being a security flaw, there's also performance issues. The more things that have to run, the slower our site's going to be. So here, what we want to do is pick and choose from the list which ones we're going to use. And I'll walk through really quick which ones I do use on our website. The first one is Carousel. Carousel provides kind of a full screen picture viewing interface. So you'll go to a gallery sometimes on a website. When you click on the gallery, it'll then blow it up to the entire screen and allow you to navigate with these left and right arrows. That's exactly what this plugin does. So this is one of the ones we want to activate. So I'm going to check it off right now. And the next one we want to activate is Contact Form. This does exactly what it says. It helps us create a form where people can contact us. So we're going to do that one. Extra sidebar widgets. There's really only one of these I actually use. Unfortunately, they kind of bundle all of them together. But a sidebar widget allows us, again, to add like a visual element. And the one we're going to use here is one that provides us the ability to add an image to our sidebar, which we're going to use to show our logo. Gravatar hover cards I like to turn on. Gravatar is a service that's been around for a long time for forums and WordPress sites. It's kind of a universal profile across the entire web, simply based on your email address. So if you have this installed, when people comment on your website, you will see if they have a Gravatar hover card, their kind of profile picture and information from Gravatar, which just adds a little bit of kind of a community feel to the site. The next one we're going to turn on here is shortcode embeds. Shortcodes are little things you can type into posts in WordPress that will embed content, typically from another site or service. With Jetpack, they've added the ability to embed Bandcamp and SoundCloud players right into your site with shortcodes, which is awesome. So if we turn this on, it's extremely easy to add those players to our site. We're then going to enable site icon. Site icon lets you add the little kind of logo for your site in the upper right of a tab in Chrome or Firefox, or if you add a website to the home screen of your mobile device, that's the icon it'll use. This plugin lets us add one of those. We're then going to use tiled galleries. This is kind of a cool thing that they added, where you can create a picture gallery in a post, which we'll use for our photo section. And every time it loads, it'll show the gallery kind of in a jagged, tiled format that looks really clean, but it's cool because it loads a little different every time. So every time somebody sees something, it'll kind of draw attention to different photos, which is cool. Then when they click on one of those galleries, it will open it up in the carousel that we talked about earlier. Now, some of these plugins here, or modules, I should say, I can't enable here because this will not allow me to connect to WordPress.com since I'm in a development site. But I'll talk about the ones here that I use. There's only 3 of them. One of them is Photon. You'll be able to check this off. You don't have to use this. This is by no means a requirement. But what Photon does is anytime somebody visits your site and an image needs to be loaded, it gets passed to WordPress's own servers, and they cache the image. Images tend to take a while to load, and if your web server is not super fast, there's a good chance that WordPress's servers will be faster than yours. So this allows you to kind of use their server as an intermediary for photos. Now that means that your data is getting sent to WordPress's servers. Some people may not like that. So if you got pictures for some reason on your site that you don't want on WordPress's servers, then don't turn this one on. Otherwise, I think it does provide a little bit of a performance enhancement. Something they just added is this one called Protect. Protect is an additional layer of security for your site that protects you from what are called brute force login attacks. And that's where some kind of automated system starts visiting your website and tries to break your username and password simply by continuously logging into it. Now, your own host probably has some protection against this, but WordPress provides this additional layer. So I do recommend turning this one on. Any extra security is always welcome. The last one I use is WordPress.com Stats. This will show statistics about your website right in your dashboard, and we'll look at these, kind of what they look like down the line on our own site. But if you enable this, it's not as robust as something like Google Analytics, but I think for our band's purposes and most of my site's purposes, since I'm not conducting a lot of e-commerce on these sites, I'm relying more on Bandcamp and other sites to handle that for me. These stats work well enough for my purposes. If you want to, there are plenty of tutorials out there on how to set up Google Analytics on your site, and you can use that instead. Google Analytics is definitely much more powerful. There's a lot more you can do with it. But for basic stats of what posts are doing well and where are people coming from, this plugin will handle that for you. So that covers installing all of the plugins that we're going to use. As we go through this tutorial, we'll talk more about configuring each of these plugins as we need them. Hopefully this is helpful. Again, if you find other plugins that you want to try out, feel free to try them out. But if you're not going to use them, please remember to delete them from your site. At the very least, deactivate them. But I recommend, if it's not something you're going to continue using, that you actually delete the code from your site. Old code, it opens up tons of security holes. So you just don't want it kind of existing anywhere in the realm of your website. Generally, also for a site like this where I'm not experimenting, I tend to stick to plugins that have a solid user base. They have at least a few thousand users, which you can see when you search for the plugin, and they generally tend to be rated 4 stars or higher. If they're rated any lower than that, you're probably running quite a few risks installing the plugin. So thanks a lot, and we'll have the next one of these up for you to watch. I think you have enough homework to do for now, though. Thanks a lot. Before I go, sorry for signing off there before doing this, but we need to actually activate these Jetpack modules once we've checked them off. So after you've checked them off, you simply go up to this little menu here, select Activate, and then hit Apply. Once you do that, all of your modules that you enabled are now turned on, and they'll be colored in blue here. You can always deactivate them by hitting Deactivate. Some of these have additional features, and you'll see a little configure option next to them. You can click with that and play around with them. Generally, I've found, though, that I just stick with the default settings for each of these. So just wanted to say that before I signed off. Sorry for missing that last little step. Thanks a lot.